At Easter dinner, my daughter-in-law, Victoria, gave me a giant chocolate egg. Inside, a brochure for a nursing home, with a note saying, "The perfect place for you." She smiled, implying I was too old for my own home at 55. I just pulled an envelope from my purse. When she saw the updated will, her face fell. She wouldn't be inheriting much after all. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. Easter Sunday. The scent of glazed ham and warm rolls mingled with the delicate perfume of spring lilies on Daniel and Victoria's dining table. I sat, as always, at the far end, observing the lively chatter and forced smiles that accompanied every family gathering at their house. My son Daniel, usually so jovial, seemed a little muted today, a quiet observer of his wife Victoria's performance. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, was, as ever, the conductor of the orchestra, her movements sharp, her laughter a little too loud, her eyes constantly sweeping the room, ensuring everyone was playing their part in her perfect family tableau. I loved these occasions, or at least, I tried to. They represented family, togetherness, a continuity I craved, especially since my husband passed. But lately, a subtle chill had begun to seep into the warmth of these gatherings, an unspoken tension that centered around me. The main course had been cleared, and the hum of conversation softened as Victoria clapped her hands together, drawing all attention. "And now," she announced, her voice dripping with an almost syrupy sweetness, "for a very special dessert, we have something uniquely thoughtful this year, especially for our dear mother Eleanor." My stomach tightened. My eyes met hers across the polished mahogany table. She was holding a truly enormous chocolate egg, elaborately decorated with swirling white and pink icing, far too grand for a mere dessert. It looked almost like a trophy. She presented it to me with a flourish, her smile wide and unblinking. "Go on, Mother Eleanor. Open it up." I saw Daniel shift uncomfortably in his seat next to Victoria. His gaze flickered to me, a brief flash of something unreadable, unease, perhaps guilt, before he quickly averted his eyes and focused intently on a crumb on his plate. My heart did a tiny, painful lurch. He knew. He must have known. My fingers trembled slightly as I took the massive egg. It felt heavier than it should, not just with chocolate. A strange sense of foreboding settled over me. I tried to crack it gently with the back of my spoon, but Victoria chirped, "Oh, don't be shy. Give it a good whack." I followed her instruction, tapping harder. The chocolate shell fractured with a decisive snap, revealing not a hollow cavity, nor a cascade of smaller candies, but a single, glossy brochure nestled within. It was for a place called Whispering Pines. My blood ran cold. I knew Whispering Pines. Everyone in our town did. It was a local joke, a notorious, cheaply run nursing home, known for its faded carpets and indifferent staff, the kind of place you threatened unruly children with. My vision blurred for a moment, but I forced myself to focus. Paper-clipped to the brochure was a small, cream-colored note card. Victoria's elegant, looping handwriting declared, unequivocally, "The perfect place for you." My heart, which had been merely tightening, now plummeted like a stone. There it was, the cruel, undeniable message. It wasn't subtle. It was blunt, cold, and utterly deliberate. This wasn't a mistaken gift, or a poorly chosen joke. This was an eviction notice, wrapped in chocolate and presented with a smile. The years of subtle hints, the "aren't you lonely in that big house" comments, the suggestions that I should downsize, they all coalesced into this one brutal, public declaration. I was unwanted. "Isn't it thoughtful, Mother Eleanor?" Victoria's voice cut through the ringing silence that had descended upon the table. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with a dangerous, triumphant sparkle. "The house is just too much for you now, isn't it? At 55. It's a lot to manage, all that upkeep. We just want what's best for you, dear." 55. I was only 55. And the house she referred to was the one my husband and I had built together, the one Daniel grew up in, the one I had poured my heart and soul into. It wasn't too much. It was my home. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the table. Forks clattered against plates, abruptly ceased. No one spoke. No one met my gaze. Except for Beatrice. My sister-in-law, my late husband's sister, sat opposite me, her face etched with genuine concern. She was a true friend, a steady presence through the years, and her eyes now held a deep, worried empathy. In that quiet moment, a cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been planned, meticulously staged for maximum humiliation, to exert public pressure, to corner me into a decision. Victoria wanted my house. She wanted the assets that came with it, and she was willing to sacrifice my dignity, my emotional well-being, to get them. A quiet rage, cold and steady, began to simmer beneath my composure. My hands, though my insides were churning, remained remarkably steady. Without a word, I reached into my large leather purse, which lay beside my chair. My fingers closed around a thick, sealed envelope I had prepared just last week, a preemptive strike born of a growing suspicion. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of the paper, the finality of its contents. With deliberate, slow movements, I slid the envelope across the table, past the remnants of dinner, past the stunned faces, directly into Victoria's waiting, suddenly expectant hand. Her initial smugness morphed into confusion as she saw the official seal. She ripped it open impatiently, probably expecting some form of capitulation, a signed agreement, anything that would further her schemes. But her face, so carefully composed moments before, fractured. Disbelief, then a raw, uncontrolled fury, contorted her features as she read the contents. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind an ashen pallor. "What? What is this?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with suppressed rage. Finally, Daniel looked up. His eyes, now wide with confusion, darted between his wife's horrified face and my unreadable expression. He picked up the document from Victoria's shaking hand, his own brow furrowing as he scanned the legal jargon. "An updated will?" he mumbled, his voice thick with incomprehension. "But this says, the majority of your estate? To Beatrice?" A faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement was all I offered. My gaze, calm and steady, met Victoria's. Her carefully constructed world, her assured victory, had just imploded. I rose from my chair, pushing it back with a soft scrape against the floor. The sound was deafening in the profound silence. Every eye in the room was on me, holding their breath. I straightened my dress, adjusted my posture, and looked directly at Victoria, then at Daniel. "Thank you for the egg, Victoria," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the stunned silence. "It's helped me realize exactly where I stand in this family." With those words, I turned and walked away from the table, from the shocked faces, from the chaos I had unleashed. I walked out of the dining room, through the front door, and into the crisp spring air, leaving behind the cacophony of dawning realization and escalating fury. The triumph I felt was hollow, quickly replaced by a deep, aching pain. As I started my car, tears, hot and bitter, finally spilled down my cheeks, blurring the budding spring landscape. The morning after Easter, a heavy silence hung in my house, mirroring the emptiness in my chest. I sat in my favorite armchair, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten on the side table, the spring sunshine streaming through the window feeling cold and intrusive. The events of yesterday replayed in my mind, a relentless loop of Victoria's saccharine smile and the chilling contents of that chocolate egg. It had been 2 years since William passed. 2 years of navigating life without my anchor, without the man who had been my rock for 30 joyous years. We built this life together, this home, this family. He was my confidant, my laughter, my quiet strength. And now, the remnants of that life felt under siege. I remembered Victoria 7 years ago, When Daniel first brought her home, she was a whirlwind of charm, all bright eyes and earnest compliments. She sought me out, telling me how much she wished she had a mother figure, how she admired my grace and strength. William, bless his trusting heart, was completely smitten. "She's good for Daniel, Eleanor," he'd said, his eyes twinkling. "Ambitious. Bright. She'll go far." And she had. But not in the way we imagined. The manipulation had been subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A casual remark about the house needing a modern touch. A gentle suggestion that perhaps my silver hair made me look a little tired, rather than distinguished. She'd compliment an outfit, then immediately follow it with a comment about how something a little more youthful might brighten my complexion. Small things, insignificant on their own. But they chipped away at my confidence, at my sense of belonging. I dismissed them then, as the petty insecurities of a younger woman, a new daughter-in-law trying to find her place. How wrong I had been. After William's death, the subtlety began to fade. The visits from Daniel and Victoria grew less frequent, peppered with excuses that felt increasingly thin. Invitations to their home became conditional. "If you're not too tired, Mother Eleanor," or "We'd love to have you, but the children will be quite boisterous." I found myself increasingly isolated, the bridge to my own son slowly being dismantled, brick by brick. Then came the photos. My wedding portrait, which had graced Daniel's mantelpiece for years, disappeared. Family photos of William and me with a young Daniel were relegated to dusty boxes in the spare room, replaced by grinning portraits of Victoria's own sprawling family. A bold visual statement of shifting allegiances. The cruelest blows, however, were the whispered words, meant to be unheard. One afternoon, I had arrived at Daniel and Victoria's house unannounced, hoping to surprise Daniel with his favorite cookies. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Victoria's hushed, serious tones. "She just seems so confused lately, Daniel. Forgetting things, repeating herself. It's worrying." My heart had pounded, a cold dread settling in. I hadn't been confused. I had simply misremembered a minor detail about a distant cousin. But her words were carefully chosen, designed to plant a seed of doubt, to undermine my very sanity in my son's mind. It was then, listening to her weave her insidious narrative, that I truly understood. Victoria wasn't just subtly influencing Daniel. She was systematically leaching the color from my relationship with him, draining it of warmth and trust, leaving behind a pale, fragile imitation. A sharp knock on the front door startled me from my reverie. It was Beatrice, my sister-in-law, my rock. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, a clear sign of a sleepless night. "Eleanor," she gasped, rushing to me and embracing me tightly. "Oh, Eleanor. I'm so sorry. I just can't believe she did that." Her voice was thick with emotion, and I clung to her, finally letting some of the rigid control I had maintained for so long loosen. "Believe it be," I said, pulling back, my voice hoarse. "She's been working towards this for years. It was only a matter of time." Beatrice looked at me, her brow furrowed with concern. "And the will, Eleanor. Is it real?" I met her gaze, a flicker of something defiant in my eyes. "Every word. I saw it coming, Bea. Since William's funeral, I swear, I could almost see her measuring for curtains, calculating the square footage. I knew she was after the house, everything we built." Beatrice shook her head, tears welling again. "But why me? Eleanor, I don't understand. I mean, I love you, you know that. But because you're the only one who's seen through her, Bea," I interrupted gently. "You never fell for her act, not once. You've always been honest. Always been there for me. And," I added, a grim satisfaction entering my voice, because it would hurt her the most. To know that after all her plotting, after all her cruelty, it all goes to someone who actually cares, someone who values family over assets. Beatrice was still absorbing this when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening further. "It's Daniel," she murmured. She hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. I could hear Daniel's voice, tight with what sounded like exasperation and confusion. "Aunt Bea, are you with Mom?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yes, Daniel, I am. Look, Victoria is. She's beside herself. She says Mom is acting completely vindictive. That this whole will thing is proof she's becoming, well, that she might have early dementia, that she's not thinking clearly." My blood ran cold. The chilling truth laid bare. She wasn't just trying to isolate me. She was systematically dismantling my credibility, painting me as a confused, senile old woman whose actions couldn't be trusted, whose words could be dismissed. It was a preemptive strike, ensuring that anything I said or did from this point forward could be easily discredited. She wasn't just after my house. She was after my very identity. Beatrice spoke into the phone, her voice surprisingly firm. "Daniel, I think you need to come over here. We need to talk, properly." He mumbled something about Victoria being upset, about having to calm her down. Beatrice sighed, then turned off the speaker. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of concern. "Eleanor," she began, her voice low. "There's something else. Daniel, he's been talking about it for a while now. He and Victoria. They've been researching memory care apartments for months. The Easter egg, Eleanor. It wasn't just a cruel joke. It was a warning shot. The implications of her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just planning to put me in a nursing home. They were already laying the groundwork, building a case to prove I was incapable of caring for myself. The thought of being stripped of my autonomy, of being confined and dismissed, ignited a fire within me, hotter than any anger I had ever known. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. The quiet, grieving widow was gone. In her place, a fierce, protective instinct ignited. "I'm done, Bea," I declared, my voice trembling not with fear, but with righteous fury. "I'm done being silent. I'm done being her convenient, fading mother-in-law. If Victoria wants a fight for this family, for my life, she's going to get one." Weeks after that devastating Easter dinner, the tension in my life became a constant, low thrum beneath the surface. Beatrice, true to her word, became a regular fixture in my home, a comforting presence and an extra set of eyes. One sunny afternoon, while we were enjoying tea in the living room, she admired an antique silver picture frame on my mantelpiece. "Oh, Eleanor," she mused. "That reminds me. Your grandmother's silver serving set. It's truly exquisite. You must bring it out for our next tea party." A flicker of unease went through me. My grandmother's silver was a treasured heirloom, usually kept safely in a velvet-lined drawer in the dining room buffet. I hadn't seen it recently, but then, I hadn't had occasion to use it. "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "Let me just check." I walked to the dining room, Beatrice following closely behind. As I pulled open the specific drawer, my heart sank. The velvet lining was there, but it was visibly emptier than it should have been. Only half the set remained. A few forks, some spoons, but the ornate serving pieces, the centerpiece, were gone. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The house had been locked. No signs of forced entry. But Daniel had always kept a spare key. A vestige from his childhood. A trust I had never thought to question. My son and his wife. Could they? Initially, a part of me recoiled from the thought. Steal? My own family? It felt too sordid. Too unimaginable. But then the image of that chocolate egg, the brochure for Whispering Pines, flashed into my mind. The casual cruelty of it, the premeditated humiliation. If Victoria was capable of that, what else was she capable of? My previous assumptions about her character, always colored by the hope that she was simply misguided or overly ambitious, began to crumble, replaced by a chilling suspicion. That night, sleep eluded me. With a heavy heart, I began a personal inventory, moving through my home like a detective in a crime scene. I opened jewelry boxes, leafed through photo albums, scoured drawers and cupboards. The full extent of the creeping disappearances began to emerge. My pearl earrings, a gift from William on our 10th anniversary, were gone from their satin pouch. A beautiful, hand-embroidered shawl, a souvenir from our trip to Ireland, was nowhere to be found. Even more unsettling were the photo albums. They were still there, but as I flipped through them, I noticed gaps. Entire pages were missing. Certain photos of William and me, or just me, carefully excised, leaving behind telltale sticky residue. Before, I had always attributed these small losses to my own absent-mindedness, the natural forgetfulness that sometimes accompanied aging, or simply the fog of grief that still occasionally descended after William's passing. I had blamed myself, convinced I was becoming confused, just as Victoria had so subtly suggested. Now, the disturbing pattern was undeniable. These weren't random losses. They were calculated removals, designed to erase my presence, my memories, my very identity within my own home. It was gaslighting, insidious and relentless, designed to make me doubt my sanity. Over the next few days, the small things continued. My reading glasses, always placed on my bedside table, would vanish, only to reappear in the kitchen drawer. My address book, carefully organized, would be found face down on the floor. A particular recipe I treasured would go missing from its usual spot. Each incident, minor on its own, fed into a growing sense of unease and a gnawing doubt about my own faculties. But now, armed with my new understanding of Victoria's methods, I recognized the pattern for what it was: a deliberate, psychological assault. Then, a phone call. It was Daniel, his voice tinged with a remorseful tone I hadn't heard in ages. "Mom," he began. I know things have been difficult. Victoria and we've been talking. We'd really like you to come over for dinner. Just us. A quiet family meal. We miss you." My first instinct was to refuse, to protect myself from further pain. But a colder, more strategic thought prevailed. I needed to see them, to observe them, to confirm my suspicions face to face. I agreed. The evening arrived, heavy with unspoken tension. Victoria greeted me at the door with an unnervingly bright smile, her eyes darting to Daniel before settling on me. "Eleanor, you found the house. All right?" Her tone was patronizing, as if I were a child who had just completed a complex puzzle. I simply nodded, my resolve hardening. The dinner itself was an excruciating exercise in passive aggression. Throughout the meal, Victoria subtly undermined almost every statement I made. If I recounted a story, she would interject with, "Are you sure that's how it happened, Eleanor?" I remember it slightly differently. If I mentioned a recent event, she would correct a minor detail, then exchange a knowing glance with Daniel, as if to say, "See? She's losing it." She even went so far as to help me cut my meat, though my hands were perfectly capable, making me feel clumsy and incompetent. Daniel, for his part, remained largely silent, his gaze fixed on his plate, a familiar sign of his complicity. Over dessert, the true purpose of the dinner finally emerged. Daniel cleared his throat nervously, avoiding my gaze. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant. "Victoria and we've been very worried about you. Lately, your confusion, your forgetfulness, it's becoming more pronounced." Victoria immediately interjected, seizing the opportunity. "Just last week, Eleanor, you didn't even recognize the Hendersons' daughter at the grocery store. You looked right through her, dear." She shook her head, feigning sorrow. My blood boiled. but I kept my voice calm. The Hendersons moved to Arizona years ago, Victoria. That must have been someone else. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Oh, no, it was definitely her. You just sometimes struggle with faces now, don't you? She gave Daniel another one of her meaningful glances. Daniel, clearly influenced, continued. Mom, we think it's time you consider downsizing. Selling the house. It's simply too much for you. We could help you find a lovely, smaller apartment, perhaps even a nice assisted living facility where you'd have more support. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought. And of course, we'd be happy to help manage your finances for you. For your own good, of course. I was too stunned to argue, to even form a coherent sentence. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. My home, my independence, my finances, my very dignity. They wanted to take it all, to strip me bare and cast me aside. The realization hit me with a sickening force. They weren't just plotting. They were enacting a full-scale takeover. The drive home from Daniel and Victoria's house was a blur of indignant tears and simmering fury. Each patronizing word, each subtle accusation of my deteriorating mind, echoed in the confines of my car. The proposal to downsize, to relinquish my home, my independence, my very financial autonomy. It was not merely a suggestion. It was an ultimatum, delivered with a veneer of concern that barely concealed their rapacious intent. They wanted to strip me of everything, to make me a dependent ward, manageable and silent. But they had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated me. The quiet, grieving widow they perceived was not the whole story. The woman who had built a successful life alongside William, who had navigated countless challenges with quiet strength, was still very much alive. As I pulled into my driveway, the familiar silhouette of my home, now a fortress under siege, brought a new resolve. I bypassed the living room, the kitchen, the spaces where I usually sought comfort, and instead walked directly to my small, unassuming office at the back of the house. This was where I kept my records, my bills, my memories, and, as of 6 months ago, something else. I sat at my antique writing desk, the one William had given me on my 40th birthday. My hands, still trembling slightly from the evening's ordeal, reached for a hidden lockbox tucked away in a secret compartment beneath the desk. With a click, it opened, revealing a neatly organized file, tabbed and dated. I had started it discreetly, almost instinctively, a few months after William's funeral, when the subtle shifts in Victoria's behavior, the increased avarice in her gaze, began to gnaw at me. A seed of suspicion, once planted, had slowly, inexorably, begun to sprout. The file contained a chilling collection of evidence, copies of bank statements, carefully extracted from a shredder William had kept in his study, showing an alarming pattern of large cash withdrawals and credit card bills with escalating balances. Phone records, revealing frequent calls to various financial institutions and luxury boutiques. And most damning of all, a meticulously researched background check I had commissioned through an old contact of William's, a retired private investigator he'd used for business matters. The background check laid bare Victoria's secret life, a massive hidden debt, accumulated through a staggering array of extravagant spending, designer clothes, high-end vacations, impulse purchases of expensive jewelry, all financed through maxed-out credit cards and predatory personal loans. Her carefully curated image of a successful, put-together businesswoman was nothing but a facade, a house of cards built on a mountain of liabilities. Her actual income, though respectable, was nowhere near sufficient to sustain her lavish lifestyle, especially not the one she was striving to maintain for Daniel and the children. As I reviewed the documents, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about a comfortable home. It was about survival for Victoria. Her desperation was palpable, almost radiating from the pages. She needed my house, my investments, my carefully managed nest egg, not for security, but to bail herself out of an abyss of her own making. The concern for my well-being, the suggestions for my future, the constant gaslighting. It was all a meticulously choreographed play, designed to strip me of my assets and my autonomy, paving the way for her to swoop in and claim what she believed was rightfully hers. I had been too trusting, too ready to attribute my growing unease to my own grief, my own aging process. I had let her carefully crafted narrative of my fading faculties take root, making me question myself. But now, seeing the irrefutable evidence, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. Every stolen item, every whispered insinuation, every act of psychological manipulation, it all pointed to a single, calculated deception, driven by her desperate financial straits. A grim smile touched my lips. Victoria had underestimated me, profoundly. She saw a frail, easily manipulated old woman, someone whose memory was failing, whose resolve was weakening. She believed I would simply fold, hand over my life to her, and fade quietly into the whispering pines she had so thoughtfully selected. But she was wrong. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce resolve. The woman she thought she was dealing with was no longer passive. This woman was ready to fight. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady. I texted Beatrice, knowing she would be awake, probably worrying. Worse than I imagined, I typed. We need to talk tomorrow. First thing. I locked the file back in its compartment, the weight of the evidence a chilling comfort. The game Victoria had started was indeed far from over. In fact, for me, it was only just beginning, and this time, I wouldn't be playing by her rules. If you're finding Eleanor's story as gripping as I am, don't miss out on the rest of her journey. Make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to stay updated with all our incredible stories. You won't want to miss what happens next. The next morning, Beatrice arrived early, her face etched with a grim determination that mirrored my own. The first words out of her mouth confirmed my deepest fears, sending a cold shiver down my spine even though I had anticipated them. Eleanor, she began, her voice low and serious as she settled onto my sofa. Victoria isn't just trying to move you out. She's trying to have you legally declared incompetent. My breath hitched. The walls, which I thought I had contained, suddenly felt like they were closing in, pressing down on me. Despite my newfound resolve, a wave of fear washed over me. Incompetent? I whispered, my voice barely audible. But I'm not. I'm perfectly capable. I can manage my own affairs. Beatrice nodded, her eyes full of understanding. I know, Eleanor. But she's been building a case. Daniel told me last night. After you left, she's been meticulously documenting every supposed memory issue, every confused moment, for months. She's already consulted an elder law attorney. She intends to use these records as evidence. The audacity of it, the sheer malice of her scheme, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about money. It was about stripping me of my autonomy, my identity. I clenched my fists. Then she's going to have a fight on her hands, I declared, my voice now firm. I have my own evidence, B. It's time you saw it. I led her back to my office and retrieved the file from its hidden compartment. As I laid out the documents, the bank statements, the credit card bills, the background check, Beatrice's initial concern slowly morphed into shock, then outright disbelief. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through Victoria's financial history. Eleanor, she gasped, pointing at a particularly damning statement. This is astronomical. 10 credit cards? All maxed out? And these cash withdrawals from Daniel and Victoria's joint account? They're huge. What is she spending all this on? She looked up, her face pale. And wait, here. Undischarged bankruptcies? Plural? Before she met Daniel? She has expensive tastes and no self-control, I explained, my voice devoid of emotion, simply stating facts. She's been living far beyond her means for years, even before she married Daniel. She's been trying to keep up an image, a lifestyle she can't afford. She married Daniel for security, and now that security is crumbling beneath her mountain of debt. My house, my investments, they're her lifeline, her escape hatch. Beatrice shook her head, still reeling. But how did you even get all this, Eleanor? This is incredibly detailed. I offered a small, grim smile. When William passed, his estate was complicated. I had to learn how to untangle investments, track down accounts, understand financial statements. I honed my skills, B. I learned to look beyond the surface. When I started to suspect Victoria was up to something, I simply applied those skills. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the information heavy between us. Daniel would never believe this now, would he? Beatrice finally said, her voice tinged with sadness. Victoria would just dismiss it as your paranoia, your vindictiveness, more proof of your fading mind. No, I agreed, a cold certainty in my voice. He wouldn't. Not yet. She has him too thoroughly convinced, too deeply under her spell. And she's made sure anything I say against her will be attributed to my supposed incompetence. We need to be smarter, B. We need to protect ourselves first. And so, we began to strategize. A silent declaration of war against an enemy who had so brazenly invaded my life. Our plan was multi-pronged, designed to legally safeguard me before Victoria could make her next move. First, we would update all my legal documents. My will, which I had already revised to name Beatrice as the primary beneficiary, would be further strengthened, ironclad against any challenges. My power of attorney and healthcare directives, which had previously named Daniel, would now explicitly designate Beatrice as my sole representative, ensuring that Victoria could not seize control of my medical or financial decisions. Second, and crucially, I would undergo a full neurological workup and comprehensive cognitive testing. We would find the best specialists, independent and reputable, to provide irrefutable documentation of my mental competence. This would be our shield against her accusations of dementia. Third, I would quietly, methodically, untangle any remaining financial connections I had with Daniel and Victoria. Any lingering joint investments, any small loans I had extended to them over the years, all would be severed, leaving no financial leverage for them to exploit. We decided to hold on to the evidence of Victoria's debts for now. It was our nuclear option, our last resort, to be deployed only when absolutely necessary. Bringing it out prematurely, we reasoned, might only escalate the conflict without achieving our primary goal of securing my independence. It felt like preparing for battle, stockpiling ammunition. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor and Beatrice moved with a quiet, efficient precision. Appointments were made, documents were signed, finances were meticulously audited and rearranged. I maintained a facade of normalcy around Daniel and Victoria, answering their calls with a polite if distant tone, making no mention of my preparations. Beneath that calm exterior, however, a transformation was occurring. The deep hurt, the simmering anger, had hardened into a steely, surprising resolve. The woman who had cried in her car after Easter dinner was gone. In her place stood someone tougher, sharper, ready to defend her life. Beatrice noticed the change. One afternoon, as we reviewed the final signed documents, she looked at me. Her eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and sadness. "You're different, Eleanor," she said softly. Stronger. I met her gaze, a faint, humorless smile touching my lips. "They left me no choice, B," I replied. Just as we were putting the documents away, a sharp knock echoed through the house. We both froze. Beatrice looked through the peephole. "It's Daniel," she whispered, quickly gathering the sensitive papers and tucking them discreetly into my desk drawer. "Alone." "Stay calm, Eleanor." I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in my hands, but it was overshadowed by a strange sense of anticipation. This was it. The confrontation had arrived. I walked to the door, my posture erect, my head held high. I opened it, unafraid, ready for whatever he and Victoria had planned next. Daniel stood on my porch, looking utterly exhausted. His shoulders slumped as if under an invisible weight. The usual confident light in his eyes was dimmed, replaced by a hollow, troubled gaze. He stepped inside, not meeting my eyes, and immediately launched into the topic that clearly weighed heaviest on him. "Mom," he began, his voice rough, "I don't understand. The will, why would you cut me out like this? After everything?" He wrung his hands, a familiar gesture from his childhood when he was truly distressed. I remained calm, my gaze steady. "Daniel," I said softly, "is your concern for me or for Victoria? Because last I checked, your wife was suggesting I be put into a nursing home, not just cut out of a will." He flinched at the mention of the nursing home, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. "Mom, that's not fair. Victoria was just worried. We both were. You've been forgetful lately. And these accusations of things disappearing, of Victoria twisting your words, they sound paranoid." He was echoing Victoria's words precisely, her narrative still firmly ingrained in his mind. I held up a hand, stopping him gently. "Daniel, please. Let's not dance around this. Victoria has systematically removed items from this house. My grandmother's silver, my pearl earrings, even family photographs. She has twisted conversations, planted seeds of doubt in your mind, and tried to convince you that I am losing my faculties. You know I wouldn't make these things up." He shook his head, looking bewildered. "Mom, those are conspiracy theories. You're upset. Victoria would never—" "Daniel, sit down," I interrupted, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He hesitated, then slowly sat in the armchair opposite me. I retrieved the folder of evidence I had shown Beatrice, placing it carefully on the coffee table between us. "Now," I continued, "I want you to look at this, not as Victoria's husband, but as my son, the son who used to trust me, who knew my character." He reluctantly opened the folder, his brow furrowing in confusion. As he began to read, his expression slowly morphed from disbelief to dawning horror. His eyes fixated on the bank statements, the shocking revelation of Victoria's astronomical debt, $87,000 just on credit cards, not to mention the large, unexplained cash withdrawals from their joint account. His face paled, the color draining from it. Then he turned to the private investigator's report. He read about Victoria's 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy men, both ending in suspiciously asset-driven divorces. He saw the dates, the carefully worded summaries, the undeniable pattern. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, began to shake. She lied," he whispered, his voice barely audible, the words laced with a profound betrayal. "She told me she was never married before me. She said she had no family history of debt." I met his shattered gaze. "No, Daniel. I am not confused. I am not paranoid. And I am certainly not ready for a nursing home. Victoria manipulated us both. She played on your love and concern for me, and she preyed on my trust." I pointed to a specific section in the report, detailing the dates of some of the larger withdrawals and the timing of the missing items from my home. "If you still doubt me, Daniel," I said, my voice cutting through his daze, "I suggest you go home and check the guest room closet. Specifically, the old trunk. I believe you'll find my grandmother's silver serving pieces and possibly a few other missing items there. Items Victoria borrowed and forgot to return." He looked utterly broken. "Why, Mom?" he choked out, tears welling in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you just show me this?" "Would you have believed me, Daniel?" I asked, my voice gentle but pointed. "Would you have believed your supposedly confused and paranoid mother over your charming, supposedly honest wife?" You dismissed my concerns just moments ago." I then pulled out another document, fresh from the printer. "And in case you're still wondering about my mental state, here are the results of my recent cognitive and neurological tests. Conducted by 2 independent specialists. They confirm I am fully competent, with no signs of dementia or cognitive decline." I slid the pristine medical reports across the table. He picked them up, his eyes skimming the reports, confirming their official nature. "The will," he finally said, his voice raw. "The changes. Was that spite, Mom?" "No, Daniel," I replied, shaking my head. "It was self-preservation. When your wife attempted to have me declared incompetent and force me into a nursing home, while planning to sell my home out from under me, I had to protect myself. And Beatrice, who has stood by me through all of Victoria's machinations, deserved my trust." He looked at me, a desperate plea in his eyes. "What? What do I do?" "You need to talk to Victoria," I said, my voice steady. "But when you do, remember the truth you just saw. Remember what she did and what she planned to do. Because she will deny everything. She will turn it around. She will try to make you believe I am lying, that I am crazy. Hold on to what you know, Daniel." Daniel finally stood, a man utterly defeated, stripped of his illusions. He mumbled a goodbye and left. The silence he left behind filled with the weight of his shattered world. Beatrice and I simply waited. A strange calm settling over me. We had laid out the truth. The ball was now in his court. 6 months later, the scent of honeysuckle drifted on a gentle breeze as I sat on my porch swing, a profound sense of peace settling over me. The storm had passed. Daniel, ashen-faced as Beatrice had described him, had indeed confronted Victoria. The evidence was irrefutable. He confirmed her massive debts, the hidden bankruptcies, and the discovery of my stolen silverware in his guest room closet had been the final, damning blow. He had initiated divorce proceedings shortly thereafter. Victoria, true to her nature, fought viciously. She contested everything, spun elaborate lies, and tried to discredit both Daniel and me. But her carefully concealed past, her history of 2 prior marriages that ended in asset-driven divorces, her insatiable debt, and my ironclad medical and legal documents negated her every claim. The court, seeing through her desperate charade, granted her only a modest settlement, barely enough to cover a fraction of her debts. And she disappeared from our lives as quickly as she had entered them. My relationship with Daniel was slowly, painstakingly healing. He had moved into a small apartment, leaving the house he shared with Victoria, and was finding his way back to the kind, honest man he used to be. The manipulation had left deep scars, but we were both committed to repairing the bond that had been so cruelly severed. I had, of course, adjusted my will again. Daniel now inherited a substantial portion of William's business interests, which I had carefully managed for years, ensuring his financial security. But the house, my beloved home, and half of my personal assets, now legally belonged to Beatrice, a quiet acknowledgement of her unwavering loyalty and love. That afternoon, Daniel arrived, not alone, but with Henry, William's old fishing buddy. Henry, a man whose presence always brought a sense of warmth and shared memories, sat on the porch swing, recounting old stories of William, a comfortable nostalgia filling the air. Daniel, with a shy smile, handed me a framed photograph. It was an old family portrait, one I hadn't seen in years, of William, a young Daniel, and me, laughing together on a picnic blanket. Victoria. She had hidden all the old photos, he admitted, his voice soft with regret. Mom, he said, looking at me, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. I am so sorry. For everything. For not seeing it. For not believing you. For letting her manipulate me. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. We both lost our way for a while, Daniel, I said, a soft smile gracing my lips. But we found it again. That's what truly matters. Later, gathered around my dining table, Daniel, Beatrice, Henry, and I. The conversation flowed easily, Laughter, genuine and heartfelt, filled the air, a stark contrast to the stilted, tense meals of the past. As the evening drew to a close, I raised my glass. To the true inheritance, I said, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the people I cherished. Resilience, dignity, and the courage to stand firm in your truth. Something no one can ever take away. And in that moment, surrounded by my real family, defined not by blood or obligation, but by genuine care and unwavering respect, I felt a profound, enduring peace.